stood at the viewing port of the diplomatic shuttle as it approached the human vessel. The ship hung in the darkness of space like a gray metal predator, its hull from countless battles, its weapons arrays bristling along every surface. The humans called it the Adamantine, and according to the briefing files had studied, it was one of their oldest warships still in active service. He found that detail interesting. Most spacefaring species retired their vessels after a few decades, replacing them with newer and more advanced designs. But humans kept their old ships flying, repairing them, upgrading them, passing them down through generations of crews like family heirlooms. The Adamantine had been in service for over 80 years. It had fought in 7 major conflicts and dozens of smaller engagements. Its hull plating had been replaced so many times that almost nothing remained of the original construction. Yet the humans still called it the same ship. They still flew it with pride. Made a note of this in his chronicle. He had learned over 3 centuries of observation that such small details often revealed more about a species than grand declarations or official histories. The shuttle docked with a gentle thump and gathered his recording equipment. He was a species known throughout the galaxy for their impartiality and their perfect memory. His people had served as chroniclers and observers for 12,000 years, documenting the rise and fall of civilizations, the outcomes of wars, the slow evolution of cultures across 1,000 worlds. The Galactic Council trusted to record the truth without bias or agenda. That was why they had sent him here, to the edge of human space, where war was about to begin. The airlock opened and stepped onto the human ship for the first time. The air smelled different than he had expected. There was a staleness to it, the scent of recycled atmosphere and too many bodies in too small a space. But underneath that, he detected something else. Something sharp and almost chemical. It took him a moment to identify it. It was the smell of weapon lubricant and battle armor sealant, the smell of a ship preparing for war. A young human stood waiting for him in the corridor. She was small by the standards of most spacefaring species, barely reaching shoulder, with dark hair pulled back in a tight knot and brown eyes that studied him with open curiosity. She wore the gray uniform of the human fleet, a simple garment without ornamentation or rank insignia that could recognize. "Observer," she asked. Her voice was pleasant, pitched higher than most species had encountered. "I'm Ensign Maria Santos. I've been assigned to help you settle in and answer any questions you might have." Inclined his head in the gesture of greeting. "Thank you, Ensign. I appreciate the assistance." Maria Santos smiled at him. It was a strange expression, common among humans but rare in most other species. The baring of teeth typically indicated aggression or challenge, but humans used it to signal friendliness and welcome. Had read about this in his preparatory materials, but seeing it in person was still somewhat unsettling. "Right this way," Maria said. "Commander Vance asked me to bring you to her office once you arrived. She wants to meet you personally." They walked through the corridors of the Adamantine and observed everything. The walls were lined with pipes and conduits, functional rather than aesthetic. Display screens showed status readouts and navigation data. Crew members hurried past them, nodding to Maria but barely glancing at. They all seemed focused, intent on their tasks. But what struck most was the decoration. Every few meters, the walls displayed images and artifacts. Photographs of crew members, some clearly old enough to be from previous generations. Flags and banners bearing symbols did not recognize. Plaques commemorating battles and achievements. A child's drawing, carefully preserved behind glass, showing a crude representation of the Adamantine surrounded by stars. "What is that?" asked, pausing before the drawing. Maria glanced at it and her smile softened. That was made by Captain Tor's daughter. She drew it when she was 6 years old, about 30 years ago. Captain Torres commanded the Adamantine during the Vega Uprising. He died defending a civilian transport from raiders. And the drawing remains. Of course, This ship carries its history with it. Every commander, every major battle, every sacrifice. The crew needs to remember what they're fighting for. Considered this. They did not decorate their vessels. They did not keep mementos of fallen commanders or display children's artwork. Their ships were tools, nothing more. The idea of creating emotional attachments to a vessel, of imbuing it with history and meaning, was foreign to his experience. Yet another note for his chronicle. They reached Commander Vance's office, and Maria pressed the signal button beside the door. A moment later, a voice called from within. "Enter." The office was small and cramped, dominated by a metal desk covered in data tablets and paper documents. Behind the desk sat a human woman in her early 50s, her brown hair streaked with gray, her face lined with the marks of age and stress. She looked up as entered, and her eyes met his without flinching. Those eyes interested. They were the color of storm clouds, gray and cold, and they held a weight that he recognized. He had seen such eyes before, in the faces of commanders who had sent thousands to their deaths and lived with the knowledge of what they had done. Eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. "Observer," she said, rising from her chair. "I'm Laura Vance. Welcome aboard the Adamantine." "Thank you, Commander. I appreciate you allowing me to observe your operations." Laura Vance did not smile. "The Council requested an impartial observer and we agreed. You're welcome aboard, but I want to be clear about something from the start. This ship and this crew are my responsibility. If your presence becomes a problem, if you interfere with operations or put my people at risk, I will put you on the first shuttle back to Council space. Is that understood?" Her tone was not hostile, merely direct. Found it refreshing after the careful diplomacy of Council chambers. "Perfectly understood, Commander. I am here only to observe and record. I will not interfere with your operations in any way." "Good." Vance sat back down and gestured to a chair across from her desk. "Sit. We should talk about what you're going to see here." Settled into the chair, noting how uncomfortable it was. Human furniture seemed designed for their specific body shape, with little consideration for other species. He adjusted his position and activated his recording implant. "The Council briefed me on the basic situation," he said. "The Dominion has been expanding into the frontier reach for the past year. Your colonial worlds lie in their path." "That's the diplomatic version." Vance leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. "The reality is simpler. They want our colonies. They've offered us the choice to surrender peacefully and accept their rule or fight and be destroyed. Those are the only options they've given us. And you've chosen to fight." "We've chosen not to surrender." Her jaw tightened. "There's a difference." Waited for her to continue. "They don't take prisoners," Vance said. "They don't negotiate after victory. When they conquer a world, they purge it. Every man, woman, and child who doesn't serve a purpose to them is eliminated. They've done it to 17 species in the past 6,000 years. I am aware of their history." "Then you understand why surrender isn't an option." Vance's voice remained steady but detected the emotion underneath. "We have 4 million people on Meridian alone. Families, children, people who came out here to build new lives. I'm not handing them over to be slaughtered." Made a note. "Your fleet is significantly outnumbered. My briefing indicated that they are sending 300 vessels to this sector. You have 42. 42, Vance confirmed. "And most of them are smaller and less powerful than the warships. By any tactical analysis, you cannot win this battle." Vance looked at him for a long moment. Her expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes, something that could not quite identify. "We'll see about that," she said. The conversation was interrupted by a chime from Vance's desk. She touched a control, and a voice emerged from the speaker. "Commander, we're picking up long-range contacts. Multiple vessels entering the outer system." "How many?" "Preliminary count is 57, more coming through behind them." Vance stood, her movements smooth and controlled. Sound general quarters. I want all hands at battle stations in 15 minutes. Yes, Commander. She looked at. You wanted to observe. Looks like you're going to get your chance sooner than expected. She strode out of the office without waiting for a response and followed. The corridor outside had transformed. Red lights flashed at regular intervals, and a low alarm tone pulsed through the ship. Crew members ran past them, but there was no panic, no confusion. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going and what they needed to do. Maria Santos appeared beside. I'll take you to the observation deck. You'll be able to see everything from there. They made their way through the ship, climbing ladders and passing through pressure doors. Notice that despite the urgency, the crew members still took time to secure each door behind them, to check equipment, to exchange brief words with their companions. There was a rhythm to their movements, a practiced efficiency that spoke of long training and experience. The observation deck was a small room near the top of the ship, with a wide viewport that offered a panoramic view of space. Display screens lined the walls, showing tactical data and communications feeds. Maria guided to a seat near the viewport and helped him strap in. Things might get rough, she said. The inertial dampeners are good, but they can't handle everything. I understand. Maria hesitated, then asked, You've seen a lot of battles, haven't you, in your work as an observer? 17 interstellar conflicts, confirmed. Dozens of smaller engagements. What's it like, watching species fight and die? It was an unexpectedly personal question. Considered his answer carefully. It is never pleasant, he said, but it is necessary. The belief that history must be recorded accurately, even the painful parts, especially the painful parts. If we do not remember what happened, we cannot learn from it. Maria nodded slowly. That makes sense. She glanced at the viewport, where the stars hung cold and distant. I hope you see something worth remembering here. She left him alone and turned his attention to the display screens. The fleet was forming up at the edge of the system. The preliminary count had been optimistic. There were not 57 ships. There were over 100, with more arriving every hour. They moved with the precision of a species that had been waging war for their formations perfect, their approach calculated. Had observed the before. He had documented their conquest of the 30 cycles ago, watching as their fleets overwhelmed the defenders and their ground forces swept across the planet. They had been a proud species, advanced in many ways, confident in their ability to defend themselves. They had lasted 12 days. They were not merely warriors, they were predators. Evolution had shaped them on a world where weakness meant death, where only the strongest and most ruthless survived. They stood 9 feet tall, their bodies covered in natural armor, their forearms ending in claws that could tear through metal. Their eyes could see in spectrums invisible to most species. Their reflexes were twice as fast as a human's. And they had been fighting wars since before humans had invented the wheel. Watched the human fleet on the tactical display. 42 ships against more than 100, with more vessels arriving constantly. The humans had arranged themselves in a defensive formation around Meridian, their largest ships at the center, their smaller vessels spread out to provide early warning and screening. It was a reasonable formation. It was also utterly inadequate. Commander Vance's voice came over the ship's communication system. All hands, this is the commander. By now you've seen the tactical display. You know what we're facing. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you the odds are good, because they're not. We're outnumbered and fighting on ground they've chosen. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was steady. But I've served with this crew for 6 years. I've watched you train. I've watched you fight. I know what you're capable of. And I know that every single one of you will do your duty today, no matter what comes. We're not fighting for glory or conquest. We're fighting for the 4 million people on that planet behind us. We're fighting for their right to live, to raise their families, to build their futures. That's worth fighting for. That's worth dying for. Another pause. Stations everyone, and may God help us all. The communication ended, and sat in silence for a long moment. He had heard many speeches before battle. Generals and admirals across a dozen species had tried to inspire their troops with words of glory and victory, promises of reward and remembrance. Most such speeches sounded hollow to his ears, empty rhetoric designed to manipulate soldiers into accepting their fate. Vance's speech had been different. There was no promise of victory, no appeal to glory, only the simple acknowledgement of what they faced and why they were fighting. She had treated her crew as adults, capable of understanding the truth and making their own choice to stand. And they had responded, could feel it in the ship around him, in the sudden focus and determination that seemed to emanate from every crew member. They were afraid. Of course they were afraid. Only a fool would face such odds without fear. But they were not running. They were not surrendering. They were preparing to fight. The hours passed slowly. Watched the fleet continue to build, ship after ship emerging from jump space until the count exceeded 300. They took their time, organizing their forces, positioning their vessels for maximum effect. They did not rush into battle. They were patient predators, willing to wait until they had every advantage before they struck. During this time, explored the adamantine. He walked its corridors, observed its crew, recorded their conversations and actions. What he saw continued to puzzle him. He found a group of engineers in one of the lower decks, working frantically to repair a damaged power coupling. They had been at it for hours, their faces streaked with sweat and grease, their hands raw from handling tools. One of them, a young man named Peter, noticed watching and paused long enough to speak. "You're the observer, right? The one from the council?" "I am." Peter wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "What do you think about all this?" Considered the question. "I think you are facing a very difficult situation." Peter laughed, a short bark of sound that held no humor. "That's one way to put it." He returned to his work, his fingers moving with practiced precision. "You know what I was doing before I joined the fleet? I was a mechanic on a mining station in the outer belt. Boring work, but it paid well. I could have stayed there forever, safe and comfortable." "Why did you leave?" "Because when they started moving into this sector, I saw what they did to a colony on the border. Just a small outpost, maybe 2,000 people. They didn't surrender because they didn't know they were supposed to. They killed every single one of them. Men, women, children, didn't matter. And I realized that if someone didn't stop them, that was going to happen everywhere." He tightened a bolt with more force than necessary. "So here I am, probably going to die in the next few days fighting an enemy I can't beat. And you know what? I don't regret it. Not for a second, because someone has to stand up. Someone has to say no, and if it's going to be anyone, it might as well be me." Recorded the conversation in its entirety. He had heard similar sentiments from soldiers in other conflicts, but usually they came accompanied by bravado and self-deception. Peter spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had made peace with his decision. It was not resignation, it was acceptance. Continued his exploration. He found crew members writing letters to their families, recording messages to be delivered if they did not survive. He found others praying, each according to their own beliefs. Some prayed alone, others in small groups. The diversity of religious practice among humans continued to surprise him. Unlike most species, which had either abandoned religion or unified around a single faith, humans maintained hundreds of different belief systems. They argued about the nature of their gods, with the same passion they argued about everything else. Yet in this moment, facing death, those differences seemed to fade. A man who followed an ancient earth religion knelt beside a woman who knew God at all, and neither seemed troubled by the other's presence. They were united by something deeper than theology. In the ship's mess hall, found Lieutenant Danny Oakes eating what appeared to be his last meal before battle. The young pilot sat alone at a corner table, working his way through a plate of food that looked entirely unappetizing to senses. "Mind if I join you?" asked. Danny gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Help yourself. Not much company to be had right now. Everyone's too busy getting ready to die." Settled into the chair. "You seem remarkably calm for someone who expects to die." "Do I?" Danny considered this while chewing. "I guess I've had time to think about it. When you sign up for the fleet, you know what you're getting into. Nobody promises you a long life. They just promise you a chance to do something that matters. And does this matter to you? This battle you cannot win." Danny set down his fork and looked at with suddenly serious eyes. "You think we can't win? The tactical analysis is clear. Your fleet is outnumbered more than 7-1. They possess superior technology, superior numbers, and superior physical capabilities. In the recorded history of galactic warfare, no species has ever defeated the under such circumstances." "Huh?" Danny picked up his fork again. "First time for everything, I guess." Blinked, uncertain if he had heard correctly. "You believe you can defeat them?" "I believe we're going to try, and I believe that trying matters even if we fail. You want to know something about humans, observer? We're not the strongest species out there. We're not the fastest or the most advanced. On our we were prey. Everything wanted to eat us. We should have gone extinct 100 times over." He took another bite of his food. "But we didn't. We survived. We figured out how to use tools, how to work together, how to keep fighting when everything said we should give up. That's what makes us different. We don't know how to quit. It's not in our nature. So yeah, the odds are against us. They've always been against us. That never stopped us before." The conversation was interrupted by an alarm. Danny was on his feet instantly, his meal forgotten. "That's the engagement warning. They're coming." He ran for the door, then paused and looked back at. "You wanted to see what humans do in battle. Stick around, observer. You're about to get one hell of a show." Made his way back to the observation deck as quickly as he could. The ship was alive with activity, crew members rushing to their stations, equipment being powered up, final preparations being made. By the time he reached the viewport, the battle had already begun. The fleet advanced in perfect formation, 300 warships moving as a single entity. Their flagship, a massive vessel nearly 3 kilometers long, hung at the center of their formation like a predator surveying its prey. Smaller ships spread out around it in protective layers, their weapons already charging. The human fleet held its position, 42 ships against 300. It looked like a child's toys arranged against an avalanche. Commander Vance's voice came over the communication system again, but this time it was directed at her fellow commanders. "All ships, this is adamantine. Hold formation until they enter optimal range. We get one chance to hit them hard before this becomes a slugging match. Make it count." They continued their approach. They were in no hurry. They knew the mathematics as well as anyone. They could afford to be patient, to let the humans wait and worry and watch their doom approach. At a distance of 50,000 kilometers, they opened fire. The first volley was a wall of light and energy that crossed the void in seconds. Watched it come, his trained eye recognizing the weapon's signatures. Plasma torpedoes, kinetic impactors, beam weapons that could cut through hull plating like paper, enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The human ship scattered. It was not a retreat. Recognized the pattern from his studies. The human formation broke apart deliberately, each ship moving along a predetermined path that maximized their evasion while maintaining their ability to return fire. They had practiced this maneuver countless times in simulations and exercises. Most of the volley missed. The few shots that connected struck glancing blows against human shields, absorbed or deflected with minimal damage, and then the humans returned fire. Their weapons were not as powerful as their ships were not as numerous, but their targeting was precise, and their coordination was perfect. Every human ship fired at the same instant, concentrating their fire on a single vessel at the edge of the enemy formation. The ship's shields flared and collapsed. Its hull buckled under the combined assault. And then it exploded, a brief flower of flame in the darkness. First blood to the humans. A cheer went up throughout the adamantine. Heard it echoing through the corridors, the spontaneous celebration of a small victory. He understood its significance. Against such overwhelming odds, every enemy ship destroyed was a triumph. But they had 300 ships. They could afford to lose one. The battle continued. They adjusted their tactics, spreading their fire across multiple human vessels instead of concentrating on single targets. The human shields began to fail under the sustained assault. Ships took damage, their hulls breached, their systems failing. The first human ship died 20 minutes into the engagement. It was a small frigate called the Resolute, commanded by a woman named. Watched as weapons tore through its defenses and ripped it apart. There were no escape pods. There was no time. 87 humans died in that moment. Sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, friends and lovers. Their lives ended in a flash of light and a spray of debris that scattered into the void. The human fleet did not falter. They closed ranks around the gap left by the Resolute's destruction, adjusting their formation without missing a beat. Another volley concentrated fire on a destroyer. Another enemy ship died. The exchange continued, one human vessel for one vessel, a ratio that could only end one way. But the humans kept fighting. Watched in growing fascination as the battle unfolded. He had observed many conflicts, documented many last stands. In his experience, species facing certain defeat eventually accepted their fate. Their resistance became token, perfunctory, a gesture rather than a genuine effort. They surrendered or they fled or they simply stopped trying. The humans did none of these things. As the hours passed and their losses mounted, they fought harder. Their tactics became more aggressive, more daring. They took risks that should have been suicidal, pressing attacks that should have failed. And somehow, impossibly, some of those attacks succeeded. Danny Oakes led a squadron of fighters through a gap in the formation, weaving between enemy ships to strike at their flagship. It was a mission that should have resulted in total annihilation. Instead, his squadron destroyed 3 cruisers before withdrawing, losing only 2 fighters in the process. When Danny returned to the adamantine, his fighter and smoking, he was laughing. "Did you see that?" he shouted over the communication channel. "Did you see what we did?" Had seen. He had seen a young man fly directly into the teeth of overwhelming firepower, trusting his skills and his instincts to keep him alive. He had seen him succeed against all odds, not because he was stronger or faster than his enemies, but because he simply refused to accept that he could fail. It was not logical, it was not rational, but it was undeniably effective. The battle raged on. Night came to the observation deck, not real night but the ship's simulated day-night cycle, and still the fighting continued. Did not sleep. He could not tear himself away from the viewport, from the endless dance of light and death that played out before him. The human fleet had been reduced to 31 ships. They had lost 47. By any objective measure, the humans were losing. They were being ground down, worn away, slowly but inevitably destroyed. And yet, notice something on the communication channels he was monitoring. The commanders were talking to each other and their tone had changed. They no longer spoke of easy victory, of swift conquest. They spoke of unexpected resistance, of concerning losses, of the need for caution. They were not afraid, not yet, but they were surprised. Commander Vance noticed it too. She called a brief conference of her surviving ship commanders, their faces appearing on screens around the Adamantine's bridge. "They're hesitating," she said. "They expected us to break by now. We haven't. That's got them worried." "Worried isn't defeated. one of the commanders replied. His ship, the Challenger, had lost half its weapons and most of its shielding. We can't keep this up forever. We don't have to keep it up forever. We just have to keep it up long enough. Long enough for what? Vance smiled, a thin expression that held no warmth. Long enough to make them understand that beating us is going to cost them more than they're willing to pay. Recorded the exchange, his mind working through the implications. It was a strategy of attrition, but not the kind he had observed before. The humans were not trying to outlast through superior numbers or resources. They were trying to make the cost of victory so high that they would choose to withdraw. It was a desperate gamble. They had never withdrawn from a battle in 6,000 years. Their pride and their nature would not allow it. But as watched the battle continue, as he saw human ship after human ship fight to the last and take enemy vessels with them, he began to wonder. They were predators. They fought to win, to conquer, to dominate. But predators were also practical. They did not expend more energy on a hunt than the prey was worth. They did not take unnecessary risks, did not pursue targets that might injure them severely even in victory. What would happen if the humans made themselves too costly to consume? The question lingered in his mind as the first day of battle came to an end. They had pulled back to regroup, their remaining 253 ships forming a distant blockade around Meridian. The humans had lost 11 vessels, nearly a quarter of their fleet. Both sides were exhausted. But the humans were still there, still fighting, still refusing to give up. Made his way through the ship, observing the aftermath. Crew members slumped at their stations, grabbing moments of rest wherever they could. Medical teams rushed to treat the wounded. Engineers worked frantically to repair damaged systems before the fighting resumed. He found Commander Vance on the bridge, standing before the main viewport, staring out at the distant fleet. She had not slept in over 30 hours. She should have been exhausted, broken, despairing. Instead, she was planning. "We hurt them today," she said without turning around. She seemed to know was there without looking. Not enough to win, but enough to make them think. "You believe they will reconsider their attack?" "No, they'll come again tomorrow and the day after that. They'll keep coming until one of us breaks." She finally turned to face him and saw the steel in her eyes. "But it's not going to be us. I don't care how many ships they have. I don't care how many of us die. We are not going to break." "Why?" asked. It was the question that had been burning in his mind all day, the question he could not answer through observation alone. "Why do you fight so hard for a battle you cannot win?" Vance considered the question for a long moment. "When I was a child," she said, "my grandmother told me a story about our family. Back on Earth, hundreds of years ago, our ancestors lived in a small village. One day, an army came. They demanded that the village surrender, hand over their food and their livestock and their young people for slavery. The village could not win against an army. Everyone knew that." She paused, her eyes distant. "But they fought anyway. Every man and woman who could hold a weapon stood in the path of that army and refused to move. They knew they were going to die. They knew the village would burn. But they also knew that some of their children had escaped into the hills. And they knew that if they could buy enough time, those children would survive." Her focus returned to, "The army destroyed the village. My ancestors died, almost every single one. But my grandmother's grandmother was one of the children who escaped. She survived. She grew up, had children of her own, and those children had children. And eventually, one of them was me." She gestured at the viewport, at the distant lights of the fleet. "Out there behind us is a planet with 4 million people. Families, children, people who have nothing to do with this war but will die horribly if we fail. I can't save all of them. Maybe I can't save any of them, but every hour we hold, every ship we destroy, is another hour for evacuation shuttles to launch, for children to escape, for some small part of our people to survive." She straightened, her shoulders squaring with renewed resolve. "That's why we fight, observer. Not because we think we can win, because giving up means giving up on them, and we will never do that. Stood in silence for a long moment after she finished speaking. In 300 cycles of observation, he had never heard anything quite like it. He had documented sacrifice before, had watched soldiers die for their causes and their comrades. But this was something different. This was not sacrifice born of duty or obligation. It was sacrifice born of love. The humans loved each other, not in the abstract way that most species acknowledged kinship or community. They loved each other with a fierce, burning intensity that drove them to impossible acts. They would die for strangers. They would fight hopeless battles. They would stand against armies and empires and gods themselves, because the alternative was abandoning someone they cared about. It was irrational, it was beautiful, and it was terrifying. Returned to the observation deck as the second day dawned. They were forming up for another assault, their ships gleaming with malevolent purpose. The human fleet, now down to 31 vessels, arranged itself once more in defensive formation. The battle resumed, and watched, recording everything, beginning to understand why every planet in the galaxy feared humanity. It was not their weapons or their ships or their technology. It was not their numbers or their resources or their strategic brilliance. It was something far simpler and far more dangerous. It was the fact that they would never, ever stop fighting for each other. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, no matter what stood in their way. They would fight until the end and beyond, because that was simply who they were. And against that kind of enemy, even the Dominion might finally meet their match.